This is Joseph Carpenter. Today is the 5th of June, 2025, and I'm interviewing Mr. Vincent Loftis. This interview is taking place in the Highland Springs Retirement Community in Dallas, Texas. It is sponsored by the UTA Department of History and Geography and is part of the Texas Veterans Project. Thank you for agreeing to be interviewed, sir.
You're more than welcome.
Where are you from originally? And tell me a little bit about your growing up.
I'm from Crowley, Louisiana. It's a small town in South Louisiana. My mother was born and raised there, grew up there. They spoke Cajun French, and it was their native language. And she lived there until she met my dad. My dad was he was from Texas, a little town called De Leon, Texas. He grew up with parents that raised chickens to sell eggs. So both of them had a very humble background, and they met. He was in the military, and he was stationed there, and he met her and asked her out on a date, and before long they got married. And so,
what did he do in the military?
He was in photo reconnaissance.
Is that right?
Yeah. And so he would study these, it was during World War II, and he would study these films and help them decipher what was going on with the enemy and what they were stockpiling and things like that. So it was very interesting, a very safe job. So he was in Denver, Colorado during World War II.
Is that right?
Yeah. So.
And tell me a little bit more about your mom.
Well, she was just a very unusual woman. She was an excellent cook. She was an artist. She studied, went to school, and she studied home economics, which meant how to cook and have a home and decorate it. And she was an amazing woman, and my dad was destined for success in the oil business because the company he worked for was really, really small at that time. It was Humble Oil and Refining Company, which became later Exxon. But he was picked from the beginning to go up high in the company. And so what he needed and what she could provide was a wife to hold social events and to polish things up a little bit. He was not a very polished man. And so she polished him up. She helped him dress and all those kind of things. And so it was a fantastic combination couple.
Where'd you go to school in high school?
In high school, I went to 4 different high schools because my dad moved all the time. And I went to school, ended up graduating up in Tulsa at Edison High School. My dad got moved from Houston to Tulsa because he got transferred from the oil and gas part of Exxon to the minerals division. And the minerals division was headquartered up in Tulsa.
I see.
So my senior year, I moved to Tulsa, which made, all of a sudden you're a senior in high school and you're put in with all these new people.
Right.
And but what that taught me, moving so much, it taught me how to make friends and adapt really well, which was a good thing to learn, and it helped me a lot. So,
anyway. Were you involved in any activities in high school?
I was because of my brother. He wanted to be a rancher. I had an older brother. And he was a very dominant kind of brother. And so whatever he did, I was required to do. And he was in something called vocational agriculture, FFA. And so he got me in that. And so when I was in the 10th grade, I was raising 3 cows for the Houston Fat Stock Show.
Oh, wow.
And that meant you had to get up every morning and go feed them and all that sort of stuff, which wasn't something I wanted to do, but I didn't have a choice. But it was something that really helped me a lot. And we still have a great relationship. I went on a tour with him not too long ago. He came by and picked me up, and he wanted to go back and visit Weatherford, Texas, where my dad had gone to college. And we wanted to go see where he went to college and where he lived and all that kind of stuff, which was a very interesting thing to do. So
that is interesting. Did you attend college?
I did. I went my first year. My dad had gone to Texas and my brother had gone to Texas, and I didn't want to go where they'd gone. Because in my family, the name John Loftis was very, very important. It had been passed on from generation to generation. And my father was a John Loftis, my brother was a John Loftis, and I wasn't. So I wanted to be different from them, and so they'd both gone to Texas. And so I went to a small school the first year called Colorado School of Mines in Golden, Colorado, where they make Coors beer.
Oh.
And it was a very interesting year. I learned a lot about myself. I learned how to study and be a good student. But everybody that graduated from Colorado School of Mines were nerds, and they wore pocket protectors, and then they wore slide rules on their belt.
Oh my!
And I saw them when they graduated, and I said, "Gosh, I don't want to be like that." And my dad says, "Well, if you don't want to be like that, you need to go somewhere else." And so I transferred back to Texas. The school I had avoided,
right.
I transferred back to Texas and was very glad I did.
What was your major?
Geology.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just like
my dad.
Yeah.
I mimicked my dad. And when I graduated, like my dad, I wanted to go to work for a big oil company. And I wanted to attain the same position that he had attained. And that was my goal. And so I went to work for a company called Shell Oil Company. And I worked for them in New Orleans, Louisiana. I was married at that point in time. And so my wife and I moved to Gretna, Louisiana, across the river. And I drove back and forth across the river every morning and to go to work.
When did you get married?
We got married when I was 21. I had dated Gail from the time I met her when I was 15. I knew the moment that I met her that I was going to marry her. And it took me 6 years to convince her. But there was just something about her that I loved. And she was everything that I wasn't. She completed me. And
kind of like your mom and your dad.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so it was neat. And we waited till we were 21 and we got married. And then shortly after we got married, at that point in time, I was still in college. I was in graduate school, and they changed the law that you couldn't have. It used to be as long as you were in college, even in graduate school, you had a deferment.
Right.
And they said you no longer have a deferment. And
what year was that?
That would have been like probably, I'm thinking 67, 68, somewhere in there.
Okay.
And so I decided I didn't want to be drafted because you didn't have any choice over things.
Right.
And so what I did was I enlisted, and they guaranteed me to go to Combat Engineer Officer Candidate School in Fort Belvoir, Virginia. They didn't guarantee you would graduate, but they guaranteed that you could get in. And and I had to sign up for an extra year. So I was signed up for 3 years. And so I went to basic and AIT in Fort Polk, Louisiana. And then when I transferred up to Fort Belvoir, Gail moved up there. She'd been staying with her parents, and she moved up there and got an apartment with another officer candidate school student. And they shared an apartment. And I could see her on the weekends and things like that. So
what was your first assignment after training?
My first assignment after training was to go to Fort Polk, and then you mean after officer candidate school?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I went to. I was made a. I went back to Fort Polk, and I was a training officer, and so I went back where I had been, and I was a training officer in a basic training unit, and so the people I was training were going through basic and AIT and then going straight to Vietnam. And so it was a fast journey, and there was no question where they were going to go.
Right,
so,
right.
Anyway.
Why did you choose the Army?
Well, I chose the Army because it was what my dad had been in, and I felt like I had more control. I had more choice over what I could do. I knew that I wanted to do something in the military that used my geology degree.
Right.
And so when I went to, when I was commissioned, and they took all the first lieutenants and they put them in this big room, and there was this big black drill sergeant. I'll never forget him. And he stood up there and he said, "Does anybody have any questions?" You weren't supposed to ask a question. And I raised my hand and he said, "Yes, Lieutenant." And I said, because they already had our orders cut at that point in time.
Right.
And I didn't know where my orders were cut to be, but he said, "What's your question?" And I said, "Are there any jobs in Vietnam that require a geology degree?" And everybody laughed. And he said, "Well, Lieutenant, I'm going to have to check on that." So I had to wait. Because of that question, I had to wait. And they found out that there was one job in country that required a geology MOS. And the guy that was in that role was getting ready to roll back to the United States.
Wow.
And so he wanted a chance to interview with me. And so
Interesting.
when I went over there, I went and interviewed with him. And of course, he needed a replacement. And so it didn't matter what. I had the job.
Didn't matter how the interview went, huh?
And it was a fantastic job because, sometimes fate or God or whatever just has things lined up for you. But it was like this was this perfect job for me. And what I did was there was a DMZ between South and North Vietnamese and North Vietnam, and they were trying to build a road. The combat engineers were trying to build a road that went the extreme length to where they could bring, because they had so many troops there and they needed to bring supplies back and forth. And the road that was there at that time was a mud road in the monsoon season.
Right.
And so before the monsoon season came, I had to have this road built. And I needed rock material to build the road. And so I would fly around in a helicopter and look for sites where there was rock. I had my rock hammer with me.
What kind of rock?
Any kind of rock that there was. It was mainly what I used was basalt, which is an igneous rock. But I was looking for limestone, any kind of rock. And in fact, there's a lot of the limestone, which would have been a good rock, I wanted to fly in there, and they said, "You can't fly in there." And I said, "Why?" And they said, "You see all the caves?" Because we were right on the DMZ.
Oh, wow, yeah.
They were full of Viet Cong,
right?
North Vietnamese, and so they wouldn't even let me go near that. So they found this. I found these basalt outcrops, and so what I would do would be, I would fly into them and then get the helicopter to land, and I would check out the rock. And if it was good rock, but I had a couple of drilling rigs, truck-mounted drilling rigs, and I'd bring them in. And we would drill enough, and I would do maps, and we'd prove up volumetrics. And if there was enough rock, then they would immediately bring in these temporary quarries and they would that they could move in,
Right.
and that they would quarry until they'd used up all the rock. And we did that until the road was built.
How long was the road?
I don't know. If you just sort of measured from one end to the other of the DMZ, that would be how long the road was. But
Wow.
a long road, because
Yes.
the road that we were starting from was along the east coast of Vietnam.
Mhm.
And it was I think it was called Highway 1.
Mm-hmm.
And it went the entire length of the road. And,
Right.
and it veered off there. And
I
so
see.
that's what I did.
That's a pretty important job for a.
It was an amazingly fun job to do.
Yeah.
And at the very end, it was funny because all of these generals and dignitaries flew in, and I've got these pictures still of me with all these dignitaries. They wanted to come out and have their picture taken.
On the
Because they
road.
were, on the road.
Right.
Yeah.
Because they were responsible for
Yeah, exactly. Well, they were responsible for having it done.
that. Right.
You know, they're the ones that got the government to pay for it. I just did the grunt work.
Right.
Yeah.
So let me back up. So
Okay.
after you left Virginia, you went to Fort Polk.
Yeah.
How long were you at Fort Polk?
I was at Fort Polk for, I think, a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's how long it took you to get the job in Vietnam, was a year?
Yeah.
Wow. And so
And then I was in Vietnam for a year, and then when I came back, they had a program when I came back that were letting people out of the military early
I see.
as officers, and so I got out 6 months early.
wow.
So
What year was it that you finished OCS?
let's see, it would have been probably 68. I'm thinking about
Okay.
68.
And so you arrived in Vietnam in '69 then?
Yeah.
And that's when you built the road,
Yeah.
and you were there for a full year
Yeah.
for your tour,
Yeah.
and then came back. And how long did you have left on your commitment?
Not much. And so I came
You
back.
said 6 months early,
Yeah, and
so
so when I came back, I was pretty much finished. And so I came back, and I actually flew back to San Francisco
Mhm.
and got the early out, and so
I see.
I didn't have a service after that.
So did you have any geology training or anything like that while you were in the Army?
No,
So
I was a degree geologist.
it was just based on your degree alone
Right.
that they allowed for that. That's pretty serendipitous
Well, they felt
that
like
this guy was there.
they felt like because of my degree in geology, and I had all the way through a master's degree
Right.
in geology. I got a geology MOS, and
Wow.
so they couldn't train me. They didn't know. The Army did. They did not have the ability to train me. They just
Right.
hired me. You know.
Right. And so what branch were you in? Were you in civil engineering or combat engineering?
Combat engineering.
Okay, I see. And did you have any language training or cultural training, anything like that before you went to Vietnam?
No.
Just went there cold.
Yeah.
Did you lose anyone that was close to you while you were there?
I did. I had friends that I went to OCS together that died, but more than that, there were what they would do when I would be doing my work would be they would put out South Vietnamese soldiers as guards. And there was a time when we had attacks where they were coming in from North Vietnam, because we were right on the border. They were coming in, there were offensives that they had, and they were coming in. And I'd be, in my bunker, and they'd be out in front of me shooting, and I saw them get shot. and
Wow.
saving my life.
Right.
protecting me.
What kind of
So-
impact did that have on you?
Well, it had this impact. I felt like I gave up my life to serve my country, and I was proud to do that, and I still am.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not proud of my country for being involved in Vietnam, because it was a useless war. It was a political war. It didn't serve a purpose. It didn't protect our country. It didn't gain us anything, and we ended up abandoning it, and the people were taken over and slaughtered for helping us, and it was a horrible war. And so I think I'm proud of my country, but I'm not, and I'm proud of what I did to serve my country, but I'm not proud of. And my kids say, "Well, were you proud to be in the Vietnam War?" And I said, "No." Does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Yes, it does. Not the first time I've heard that
Yeah.
spoken. What was your rank when you left Vietnam?
First lieutenant.
Okay, so you're still a lieutenant when you left Vietnam.
Yeah. I was. They offered me a chance to sign up and become a captain, and I'd had all of the material all of the military at that point in time I wanted.
Right.
So I didn't want to be in the military.
Well, your training in OCS, what kind of help did that offer you in Vietnam?
Well, I think the thing it helped me do was, OCS was a very difficult time. You were kept up to all hours of the night. You were caused to go without eating, and they would take you out on these marches, and they would load you up with all of the packs and equipment and march you all night long.
Mm-hmm.
And what I learned during that was that I could do things that I didn't think I could do.
Right.
It stretched me.
Mm-hmm.
And it trained me to never give up, to have a lot of confidence in what I could do. And I think that's what it trained me to do.
So how many troops did you have working under you when you were in Vietnam building that road?
3.
3?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I had 3.
How'd you do that?
I had 2. I had a sergeant and 2 enlisted men.
Well, who was doing the labor?
We didn't build the road.
Okay.
All we did was find the rock. Combat engineers built the road.
They did all
We
that.
found the rock.
Okay.
We had these 2 truck-mounted drilling rigs, and these 2 guys would drill and operate. And I had a Jeep that I would drill and I would drive, and we would drill down the holes down, and when the rock would come up, I would look at it and make sure, and then I'd take my map and make sure we had enough volume. And so as soon as that was done, they started quarrying the rock.
You just truck it out and that was it.
Yeah.
Did you get to see the final product?
Yeah.
How'd you feel about that?
Well, I was glad. I was glad that we got the road built, and I was about ready to come home, and so I was glad that we got the road built. At that point in time, I guess I still hoped that the war would serve some purpose.
Yeah.
But later on, I realized that it didn't.
How did you communicate with your loved ones while you're in Vietnam?
Letters. In fact, she still has them.
Does she really?
And
Is
I
that
still got
right?
hers. And
Right.
every once in a while, I'll read them, but we couldn't talk on the phone.
Right.
And so we would do that. And then sometime during your tour, you had a couple of week R&R.
Right.
And usually that was in Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
And I told her I wanted to do that close to the end of my tour.
I see.
to where I wouldn't have much time left at the end of that. So we did that, and that was just so good to see her.
Yeah.
And gosh, but it was good because I think we only had like 6 weeks from the time we went back before it was over. Something like that.
Wow.
So
Okay.
I did that on purpose. I
Yeah.
didn't want to see her and then have to go back.
Yeah, that would be painful.
Very painful.
Yeah. So what kind of challenges did being away from home create?
Oh, I think lonely.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have any family. You don't have any friends. I tried to make friends with the Vietnamese people, and because I was around them, I was close to them, and they were such a different culture, and I was free to travel. I had a pass where I could just travel anywhere I wanted.
Oh, wow.
And so I would go out on the streets of Vietnam, and I'd eat with them, and I'd ask them to. I would take an interpreter with me, and I'd ask them what their life was like, and I especially loved being with the little kids because they were all intrigued with me because I was different.
Yes.
And I had a lot of pictures taken with me and the little kids and people.
Right?
And I really loved the people, and I felt like they were people that lived without a hope. They'd had war all their life. I mean, going back to the French being over there, and I felt like I felt sorry for them, and I felt like they had been a people that had never grown up in a peacetime.
Right.
And being able to really be free to enjoy their lives. So
What was your homecoming like?
it was wonderful. It was wonderful to see my wife again and to be home and to know it was over and to know that I could return to being a geologist again and to have my life.
How aware were you of the social upheaval that the war in Vietnam caused?
I was aware of it, but I was made more aware of it when I got back. Because in San Francisco, when we got back, there were people that were picketing and doing all of that. And in a sense, I didn't take it personally. And in a sense, I was beginning to understand it because I think what they were picketing, I wasn't disagreeing with them. And, it's funny, at that point in time, I had a good friend that I had met, and he and I had played golf together, and he was just a normal guy, and he later became the president of the United States. His name was George Bush.
You're kidding.
No, we were just such good friends.
How interesting. How did you meet him?
And his wife.
At UT?
Yeah, he and his wife and my wife and I were good friends. And we'd have dinner together, and he was just a normal guy.
Wow. How interesting.
And I asked him, I said, at that point in time, he was in Lubbock. And I said, well, George, what are you going to do when you retire? And he said, I said, are you going to stay in politics? And he said, no, I don't like politics. He probably doesn't remember that,
Right.
but he said that. But he was such a good guy. He was just such a good friend and down-to-earth guy.
Yeah.
And so
you met him in college.
Yeah.
And do you still stay in touch?
No. We haven't stayed in touch in a long, long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You haven't even tried to reach out to him?
I haven't. I've thought about it. I doubt he would remember me. I think he was very important to me because he was such a, I followed him. And
Yeah.
I think my wife stayed in touch with his wife a little bit for a while, but he's just, he was a good guy. He was a guy that I respected a lot.
Right. What was your favorite part of serving?
I think my favorite part of serving was getting to know people. At that point in time, I had never had a friend that was black. It was, the culture was just
I understand.
different. And I had this training officer, his name was Drill Sergeant Smith. And we were at Fort Polk. He was the first black person that I ever became really a good friend with. And he and his wife would have my wife and I out to dinner over to their house. And we'd do the same thing. And it was just so interesting. And so I remember at one point in time, we played golf together. And that was interesting because I belonged to a little country club, and I took him to play golf, and the caddies thought that was really strange because caddies were all black, you know.
Wow, yeah.
So, but the culture was just so different, then you can't even really imagine what that was like. So,
what was the lowest point during your service?
I think being in places in Vietnam where there was no one there that I could be with or talk to, or just so isolated, and starting to realize that I was doing something that wasn't really going to make a difference.
Right. How quickly did you figure that out?
Oh, pretty quick. I mean, I think pretty quick. I think that you could see that we weren't gaining ground, and that we were fighting for a people that didn't want to be fought for.
Right. They just wanted to be left alone.
They wanted peace. Yeah. And as soon as we left and abandoned them and flew out of there, they were taken over again.
Right. Did you receive any medals or citations that stand out to you as particularly meaningful?
No, I don't think so. I got sort of all the ones that you got.
Sure.
So no, not really.
Is there anything that reminds you of your service, smells or sounds or music, anything that takes you back?
Not so much sounds but when my grandchildren want to know about me and want to know about what I did, I'll pull out all the pictures, the photographs.
Yes.
And show them.
That's good.
And of course, I look so different then, they don't recognize me. At one point in time, I decided that I wanted to grow a mustache. And so I grew one of these mustaches. And when I went to see my wife, she said, "Oh, that's horrible." I thought I looked so cool. She said, "Would you please shave it off?" And I did.
It's a little deflating.
Yeah. Well, no, I think I was glad. I didn't like it.
Oh, so, you didn't like it either.
No.
Okay. That's
but you always think, I need to grow a beard. This is the time to do it.
Do you stay in contact with anybody that you served with?
No, I don't. I tried to get in touch with some of the guys that were in my group, and I couldn't find them. So,
oh wow,
they weren't in the Army anymore. So
right. So, what did you do after you left the military?
Well, I went back to work for Shellwall Company. They had given me a military leave of absence, and so I came back to the same job in New Orleans, and so I picked up right where I left off.
Wow.
It was nice.
And how long did you work for Shell?
I worked for them for another, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 years, maybe 7 years, somewhere in there. I can't remember.
Mm-hmm.
But I realized that I wanted to be like my dad, and I wanted to be a vice president of exploration.
Okay.
And I finally realized with Shell, what was so important to them was your level of education.
Mm.
And for anybody to do well in Shell, you had to be have at least a doctorate degree.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, the guy that was my boss had a PhD in zircon crystals that he was very enamored with. And I thought, what in the world does having a PhD in zircon crystals do to help you find oil?
Right.
And it doesn't. But for them,
You never figured that out.
well, no, I know. And finally, somebody told me, someone that was an advisor of mine said, it seems like to me you need to work for a smaller company
Uh-huh.
that's like an independent oil company.
Right.
And I said, what's that?
Right.
And so I started working my way down. I worked for smaller and smaller companies. And finally, this guy told me that he said, you ought to just go out on your own.
Hmm.
And he said, if you want to do that, I'll bankroll you to do that.
My goodness.
And what I'll do is I'll put up a moderate overhead for you,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll put up the money it takes for you to buy leases and put the prospects together and sell them. And then for doing that, I want half of whatever promote you get. And I said, well, that's a good deal.
Okay.
And so he bankrolled me, and
My goodness.
I turned deals like a crazy man.
Did you?
And I ended up turning all of my deals to the same companies. And so finally,
Yeah.
I made enough money where I didn't need that anymore. And
I see.
I could retire
Mm-hmm.
and just do what I wanted to do. And,
So how old were you when you retired?
I was 65. And
okay.
It took that long, but it was a progressive kind of a thing because I became more and more independent as I made more and more money, and I would take more and more interest. And especially, there were certain deals I would take a lot of interest in because I knew that they were low risk and that they had a high probability, a 70% probability of being successful. And so
That high?
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, we started doing something called horizontal drilling, and it's like mining for coal.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd go down in the ground. I don't know if this makes sense. You'd go down in the ground to a horizon that was a very thick. Everybody knew it was a very thick, oil-rich shale.
Mm-hmm.
But because it was shale, it wouldn't give up oil on its own because it didn't have any permeability.
Right.
And so what you do is you'd go down to that zone and you drill out 7 miles and you'd set pipe and then you'd, in stages, frack that coming back in. And the wells would flow 700, 800 barrels a day.
My goodness.
And, at that time, oil was $100 a barrel. And so you can do the numbers and figure out what that would do. And so, so when we started doing that, I started taking an interest in those. And anyway, and they would let me because, that the people I was selling to were people that I became friends with.
Right.
And so.
Right. So that fracking, that's pretty early in the the fracking game, I guess.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then after a while, that's all they did, And,
so if you could serve all over again, would you do that?
in the military?
Mm-hmm.
You bet I would.
Mm-hmm.
I learned more serving in the military about myself
Yeah.
and about people and about what was important and what wasn't important. And I think it changed my life. And
What would you change about what you did, the path that you took?
I don't think anything. I think I'd do it all the same if I were to do it over
Really?
again. Yeah, if I had a do-over, I think I'd do it all over again.
So
I certainly would marry the same woman.
that's good.
She's just been a wonderful wife. And
That's what. How long have you been married?
let's see, we got married when we were 21 and I'm 79, so 58 years.
My goodness.
Long time.
Do you have a secret to marital longevity?
I think the secret is finding somebody that completes you,
Yes.
and then loving her and taking good care of her. And there's a scripture that says that you need to treat your wives tenderly and lovingly and with respectfully.
Mm-hmm.
And
Do you have any advice for young people who might be considering the military?
I would say it's good for you.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good experience. You can serve in the military without making the military a career. You'll learn things about yourself and you'll be exposed to people that will grow you. And it's a good thing to do.
Is there anything that you would like to add that we haven't discussed?
I don't think so. I think we've covered a bunch of stuff.
Good. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to be
Well,
interviewed.
thank you
I really
for interviewing
appreciate
me,
it.
and I enjoyed the opportunity.
Thank you again.
All right.